Hello, everyone. Welcome to Grant Writing for Teachers. This is a professional development session that the Canton Symphony is putting on. We try to do at least 2 of these this summer. For attending this session, if you're a teacher, you will be receiving an email from me that will award you 1 contact hour to go towards your continuing education credits. So that's really exciting. My name is Rachel Hegemeyer. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Manager of Education and Community Engagement here at the Canton Symphony. And I'm very excited to have these wonderful people with me today. I will go ahead and introduce them. First, we have Brenda Cummins. She is a Philanthropic Advisor at the Cleveland Foundation. We also have Courtenay Barton. She's a Program Director for Arts and Culture and Racial Equity Initiatives. Then we have Katie Brennan. She's a Program Officer for Education specifically. And then also joining us, we have Dan Keenan Jr. He's the Executive Director of the Martha Holden Jennings Foundation. I really hope you enjoy this session. And if you are able to check out our other professional development opportunity that's happening on August 11th, that is going to be about trauma-informed care in the classroom. That one will be a 2-hour in-person workshop hosted by Mary Kreitz of Child and Adolescent Behavioral Health. So if you are able to join that session for us in person, feel free to email me. We are also looking into having it be mixed if you are not in the Canton area and still would like to attend. So feel free to email me if you have any questions about that session. We are more than happy to make it work for you. But without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to these wonderful people and we will get started for today. So Brenda, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Rachel. And thanks for having us. I'm really impressed with the Canton Symphony's work with teachers and arts and culture professionals to really connect them to meaningful events, and especially when it comes to fundraising, because we know how important that all is to the work that we do, especially in arts and culture. As Rachel mentioned, I'm Brenda Cummins. I'm one of the Philanthropic Advisors at the Cleveland Foundation. And today we're going to start off, I've put together a little panel that's going to talk really about grant writing. It's interesting for teachers. Most often, teachers don't think about fundraising, especially individual teachers when they're thinking about their programming. You receive your state funding, your school district sets your budget, and you know what you need. And I have to tend to believe that if you're like most teachers in the state of Ohio, where some funding has actually been deemed unconstitutional, I think, at a number of schools, the school funding model is not what it should be. You guys are probably spending a lot of out-of-pocket money as well in terms of, supporting the work that you do in the classroom. So anytime we can work with, and educate people on ways to perhaps access additional funding, we're always happy to do that. I am going to just introduce and invite our 3 panelists to introduce themselves, and then tell a bit about each of their respective organizations. Katie, Courtney, and I are all from the Cleveland Foundation, but we work in specific areas. So I think you'll find that interesting and work in that grant space in different ways. I'm going to start off with Dan, though, and have him introduce himself. He's from the Martha Holden Jennings Foundation and has an interesting story that I think probably a lot of teachers are not necessarily aware of, but he brings important work to the grant writing space specifically for teachers and schools. So Dan, go ahead and if you want to introduce yourself and tell a little bit about the foundation, and then we'll turn it over to Courtney and then to Katie. So.
Great. And Rachel, I've been down there. There's a ton of construction. And my brother used to be principal at Camp McKinley High School. So years ago, probably 15, 20 years ago. My name's Dan Keenan, and I worked in schools for 21 years before the Jennings Foundation, 3 years as 3 different school districts as a teacher, and 3 different districts as an administrator. My last stop was the superintendent of schools in Westlake and Cleveland, but I've been a building administrator and a science teacher and so on and so on. And the Jennings Foundation, that's important because the Jennings Foundation's always had someone who was a former practitioner in my role. We are the only foundation in Ohio that's solely dedicated to funding public education across the entire state. So we have 2 themes that we fund: excellent teaching and deep learning. And really excellent teaching is ways that teachers can be supported through ongoing staff development, that it's not just a one-time workshop, that it's embedded and get a chance to practice your strategies and so on and so on. And deep learning is where you're engaging kids in probably what things that you all do for, regularly. It's really trying to make it stick, make it meaningful, and really connect that learning for students. The neat thing about the Jennings Foundation also is we have these large grants that we give that are, we have pilot grants that are $500,000, but most of our grants are 15 to 50 for a school district or a school building. And then we also have teacher grants that are up to $3,000. And we've kept those for a very long time, since 1959, because we feel that it demonstrates we understand that real change happens at the classroom level. So as much as we're excited about our bigger level work, we also know that that grant program is important. And quite frankly, it's our least accessed grant. Almost every time I have a grant period, I have twice as many requests for our open grants, our larger school building and school district grants, as we have available funds. And for our grants to educators, which is that teacher fund, I typically have about as many requests as we have budgeted, or sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more. But really, if you develop a good proposal, there's a decent chance you'll be funded for that. But we also know it's really difficult for teachers to take the time to do that. Appreciate that you're taking time to do something like this during your summer. So right off the bat, you seem like great candidates for it because of what you're showing through being here today.
Thanks, Dan. Courtenay, as the Director of Arts and Culture, Program Officer for Arts and Culture at the Cleveland Foundation, clearly we've got a lot of arts and culture teachers here, so there's definitely a synergy there. Courtenay, tell us about yourself and how the Cleveland Foundation supports arts and culture.
Absolutely. Good morning. I was going to say afternoon. I've been up for a while. Good morning. So I'm Courtenay Barton. I'm the Program Director for Arts and Culture and Racial Equity Initiatives at the Cleveland Foundation. The Cleveland Foundation is a big supporter of arts and culture, especially in making rigorous opportunities for youth to learn to master various disciplines. So we have a program, an initiative called the Arts Mastery Program, which supports arts and culture organizations to provide training in various disciplines in neighborhoods, primarily out of school time, although some of these programs do actually operate in school buildings, but out of school time, so after school weekends and summer. We are a huge proponent of working with the school system, Cleveland Metropolitan School District, in supporting and planning for providing opportunities for all youth to have meaningful education in arts and culture across the spectrum, which I'm sure you understand can be a very difficult proposition. Arts and culture, unfortunately, is typically the first subject on the chopping block when it comes to public education. And that's certainly something that we have contended with here in Cleveland. I can say that it can be a little bit difficult, at least for the Cleveland Foundation, to support individual teacher projects in schools, primarily because there are so many great projects and we don't have enough to go around. But prior to coming to the Cleveland Foundation, I actually did work in education. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I worked in a charter school for 6.5 years where I was a fundraiser. And so one of the things that I worked with teachers a lot with was thinking about accessing alternative sources of funding to pull off projects. Sometimes it was with private foundations that did have an arm for giving for specifically either individual schools or sometimes individual teacher projects. That's really rare. So it's exciting to hear about the Martha Holden Jennings Foundation really, standing strong with that program, because that's really rare. But I did often work with teachers to think about crowdfunding strategies, because I think that's actually an area that it's relatively easy, for teachers to get support because people connect very strongly to the classroom level experience. And so for relatively modest requests, I would never suggest a crowdfunding project of $10,000. I've seen it there. That's a little bit more difficult for people to connect with. But if it is something along the lines of an experience, materials or supplies, or a project that you want to pull off that is pretty discreet, using platforms like Donors Choose, and Donors Choose is specifically for educators, is a great strategy. The one thing that Donors Choose can do that a lot of other crowdfunding platforms can't do is that Donors Choose is a 501c3 organization, and they specialize in getting grants from organizations to half fund and or match educator projects in various areas. So it could be that they have a corporate donor or a foundation donor that says, hey, we want to give X amount of money to half fund any teacher projects in these areas. And then that gives you a really good boost on the system to get steam for other projects. So I'll stop there, but that's just something that I think, I would constantly encourage teachers, and I still encourage teacher friends of mine to consider utilizing crowdfunding platforms for discrete projects.
Thanks, Courtney. I appreciate the conversation around crowdfunding. We're used to seeing that on social media platforms and for any number of things. And I think it's really important to think about that, and I like the idea. You said donors choice.
Donors Choose. I
Donors Choose. Yeah. So that would be a place where you could list your project, and then donors would go out and search for that and search through the available projects that they want to support. So yeah. Great opportunity there. Katie, tell us a little bit about your work and your background, and how education, our support at the Cleveland Foundation of Education is kind of trickling down to teachers. Thanks.
Absolutely. Hi, I am Katie Brennan, Program Officer for Education at the Cleveland Foundation. I've been at the foundation for about 5 years. I came to the foundation after finishing my master's in conflict transformation and social justice. And on the side, I actually teach a high school UK Irish Studies course, and am an adjunct professor at Cuyahoga Community College. So I really appreciate teachers because I have a taste of what you do, but I don't do it full time. And so while the Cleveland Foundation does have the footprint of Cuyahoga, Lake, and Geauga counties, our education focus tends to really be around Cleveland Metropolitan School District, or I'm going to call it CMSD. And we do some responsive grant making for projects and initiatives, especially for like really innovative projects outside of the district, but our partnership is really, really focused on centering our low-income Cleveland students, who are mostly students of color, and really with a focus on equity. And in our grant making, our goal is to make a wide scale impact and really focus on system change. So often our initiatives are really in deep partnership with the with CMSD leadership, and we are trying to make changes at scale, or at least pilot them so that they could potentially be at scale. And there's a lot of different ways that we do that. But one of the big things is collective impact models, and really trying to get multiple people from different sectors at the same table, especially people who might not otherwise have wanted to be at the table together, to really start working through some of those really challenging issues. And then we also try to do some policy change at both the local and mainly state level. Though we are obviously a community foundation and we focus on our community, a lot of the education, as you know, a lot of those decisions are made in Columbus. So as a community foundation, we're able to do a little bit more advocacy work than some other foundations. We're even allowed to do some lobbying work. So we've kind of made that central to our education strategy. But because of this and our broad focus on big scale change, we often don't fund small projects. But there are ways that teachers could potentially be involved. And we have seen educators, at the school level, whether that be teachers or principals, kind of brainstorm and then oversee certain projects. And usually that is through partnerships, either within their district or local businesses or nonprofits. I think one of the things that I really try to mention in these kind of meetings is the importance of partnership. I think there's sometimes this idea of competition, especially for nonprofit partners, not necessarily as much for teachers, but when really, I think a lot of grantees are a lot more likely to be funded if they're showing that they're working with other groups and trying to kind of combine efforts and be more effective together. And so like for one example that kind of comes to mind is there was an educator at one of our schools that was really interested in computer science curriculum and really developing that within her school. And she ended up partnering with a local nonprofit and a local university and trying to bring that up to scale for multiple schools. And we've been working with them, and they've been able to get some national grants as well. And that really came from an idea in one building. But she took the initiative and then reached out to us, and we were able to help her build additional partnerships. So that's one big way. And then another thing is we're really diligent about when we do these district-wide initiatives, we are very intentional about bringing in educators from the start. Even though we're an outside organization, in a lot of the work we do, it really is only if the school district is interested. And we try to bring people to the table from central office and the teachers union. And one project around career pathways that we're currently working on, we have, people from employers, nonprofits, the public sector, philanthropy, but also CMSD central office. We've had some representatives from charter schools be part of it. We have principals, teachers, counselors. So we're really trying to make sure that those experiences and voices are at the table when building these wide scale initiatives, and when people have these innovative ideas really coming forward and being willing to share, because that could impact long-term more significant change than just in their classroom or at their school level.
Thanks, Katie. Katie mentioned sort of the Cleveland Foundation geographical footprint. And while many of you on the call are not in that Cuyahoga Lake Geauga County area, it's really important just to remember, community foundations, we have many in Ohio. We have one in Canton. We've got the Akron Community Foundation, Columbus Community Foundation. Really, there are many community foundations that are, that are working and supporting education across the state. And again, as Dan mentioned with Martha, Holden, Jennings, so many opportunities, even with some small private foundations. The question is, how do we research all of these and, and find, what might be appropriate in your area? So, there is an organization called the Foundation Center. There is a membership involved with that, but, even your public libraries will often have, places where you can go to sort of research, particular foundations that are supporting your initiatives. And I can't stress it enough. And I think, you all would make the case, as Katie mentioned, the collaboration, even with your administrators and your school board. You are on the ground in arts and culture, and you have and can make the case for the importance of art in the learning environment and in the educational system. I mean, we all know, and I'm preaching to the choir about, how art instills creativity and how creativity spills into absolutely every single thing from, our business world to our science world to, whatever we're doing. Art is really a key component to innovation. So if you want to really think about, as you're talking with your board about, or your principal about how you might collaborate with outside organizations, that innovation piece is really, it's really critical. Art is really critical to that. So I just want to throw that out there, and just in your mind, in the back of your mind, making sure that you're not just talking about your particular music or, physical art projects, but more about how, how that affects the entire student well-being. So I'm going to go back. I want to just go back to Dan for a minute. Dan, you've told us about the foundation and its support, especially, interesting enough, of individual teachers, as well as, as school districts. So Dan, can you tell us a little bit about, the grant application process? And I guess, let's do this. What are some of the biggest mistakes that people make when they're applying for a grant? And we could say, what is a good grant? How does, what makes sense to apply to? But, a lot of times people make, even just some judgment errors in terms of how they write up a grant. And you probably have some good examples of that. So I'll let you talk about that for a minute.
Yes, I think we're all trying to think about processes to connect with people we want to invest in, but make it as easy as possible, because we know how busy you are. So there's always that, how do we get the funding in the hands of the right people? I think a lot of times you're just so passionate about what you want to do that you kind of forget to translate for the reader the core components. You'll say the stuff you want, and and I know it sounds simple in it, but you maybe don't answer the questions. It's a pretty common mistake. So I just always tell people, like, the very first thing you should do is succinctly answer the question and then fill in everything else. Just as succinctly, if you were like a 2-second answer that question and then fill in the rest, because sometimes your passion gets ahead of you. But with ours, which is a great thing, but it's really, you got to remember, on the reading end, it could be an educator or it may not be an educator, and they may not realize as intuitively as you think they would how you want to use the stuff that you're asking. So I'd say the biggest advice I'd give you for at least a Jennings grant, and probably others, would be tell us about the learning that you're trying to create, and then let it be shown how the stuff will help that happen. Because of course you're writing a budget to obtain either materials or staff development in our case, but for teachers most of the time it's materials to get something done. But I'll use this hopefully quick example of something that came through to show you the nuanced difference. This was obviously a couple of years ago because the technology is old, but we had 2 grants for iPod Touches as the budget items. But the first one basically said, iPod Touches to advance my centers. And this teacher wanted to do guided reading. This was a literacy grant. And what she wanted to do is, when she pulled the 2 or 3 kids in a reading group together, she wanted to put iPod Touches at the various stations and said, so many apps you can do for math, science, and I can keep them connected to meaningful stuff if I just have apps or just have these iPod Touches in the stations and allow me to do guided reading. We didn't fund that grant. But we did have a second grant that same grant period that said, I want to teach, do a genre study with my students and advance their fluency. And what I'd like to do is teach 3 different genres. And I'd like the students to pick their favorite and talk about the characteristics of it, read a story in that genre into an iPod Touch, share it with a loved one at home, create a short story of their own in the same genre, read that back into the iPod Touch, share it with students, and show how that had the elements of that genre. So clearly they were learning the genre and the characteristics. They were reading back and forth. They were sharing with someone at home, making the connections. The budget was nearly identical. That second one was funded, no brainer, and I think almost the first teacher probably would have done that if she would have known, like, okay, this is what I would have done in science and this is what I would have done. She just assumed we knew how she'd use the technology. And so I would say lead with, what you're really excited about as far as your objectives and how you're going to go deep and ongoing, whether it's improv or whether it's rhythm or whatever you're responsible for teaching, to say, I want to really go deep into it. And here's the ways I'm going to do it, but I only need X, Y, and Z to get that done. That's the best advice I'd give you. And then the other thing I'd say is, at least for an organization like ours, it's okay to call beforehand and it's all okay to call after and get feedback. I know that's different with different foundations, but that's something that we value when somebody says, I didn't get that grant and I want to know why. We could lead you to a spot on our website to read, or we could, sit down and say, here's some things that really would have made that a successful grant.
Thanks, Dan. One of the things that I've often done when I did my own grant writing, when I was in more frontline fundraising, was to have a lay person read the grant application and say, does this make sense? How does, am I making my points, clearly and concisely, because you don't always know exactly who is going to be reviewing it, who may not necessarily understand all of the technical issues. So really, I love the idea too of when you're going out to apply for a grant. I think Martha Holden Jennings has a lot of good information on their website about that grant application process, and really taking the time to read through what grantors are providing you in terms of what they need, to really take the time to read through and sort of analyze what it is they're asking for. And I think that's always helpful. Courtenay, how about in arts and culture? What are some mistakes that some people make when they're applying, or what is it you're looking for in a grant application?
First, and I just put this in the chat, but I 100% agree with everything you just said, Dan, in terms of just connecting the dots as explicitly as possible with what you are asking for and why it is important and how you will utilize it and how it will make a difference. We just ended a request for proposals in which we got a high number of requests for proposals, requests from organizations that they clearly didn't have a lot of experience in writing grants. And so what I thought was very interesting was that their narratives were not well connected to the budgets, right? They would be, say, asking for a consultant to help with perhaps developing policies for their board, which is not necessarily something that you would be asking for. But their narrative did not explain why they needed that and how that was going to help their organization meet their objectives. And so similarly, as Dan said, just make sure you make it as incredibly explicit as possible so that whoever is reading it, really does understand. Try to not use as much education jargon as possible. To Brenda's point, make it something that a layperson who might not be familiar, who has perhaps a passion for helping with education, but doesn't really understand what's happening in professional development right now in education, make it so that they can understand it. I was an English major, so I like to just say, use the 5 W's and the H, right? Who, what, where, when, why, and how. And if you can answer those, just as Dan said, really succinctly and directly, you have the frame for everything that you would need to write in your proposal. Or if you were going to put it up on Donors Choose, and I just looked at Donors Choose, and it looks like there are about 14 projects in the Canton area listed, but it looks like they have a grant from PNC that is matching anything that, is donated to those. So if an individual gives you $25, PNC is matching that with another $25. So let that perhaps be an incentive to, check out that platform. But make it so that the person, says, okay, this teacher is in this school working with these kids and they need this thing in order to achieve this objective. And if you can do that really, really simply, really directly, you'll be able to connect with people. Because really, you're just trying to connect with people when it comes to fundraising. You're just trying to make sure that people understand, and people are remarkably generous as long as they understand what it is that you are trying to accomplish.
Courtenay, I appreciate you saying that, because that is so true. Behind every electronic grant application is a person. And again, when you're reaching out, back in the old days, we didn't have the electronic grant application process. So sometimes it was a little more, sometimes you just had to write, type them out and make 15 copies. And, as soon as you printed the 15 copies off the printer, you realized there was a typo on page 1. So then you reprinted, another 15 copies, right? But there is a person behind it. And, the Cleveland Foundation they actually have a 2-step process. The first step is a letter of inquiry, which gives you the opportunity to lay out very succinctly what it is you'd like to, what project you'd like to fund, and then a program officer will get back in touch with you with maybe a couple additional questions, and then we'll invite you to fill out the full application. But in the end, it is all about the relationship and about people. Katie, what would you like to add about some of the education grants especially since many of those come directly from the school districts?
Yeah, so actually, I think that there's a lot that I just want to kind of build off of both what Dan and Courtney have mentioned. One thing is, well, first of all, I think I really appreciate Courtney mentioning trying to answer those questions, but also being succinct, because I do have some grantees who will submit 40 pages of an application, and it's not the only thing I'm doing in my work. And so it takes a lot of time to dig through. So I really appreciate when the information's all there, you want to make sure you answer the questions, but it doesn't need to be a novel. And also, and I know sometimes in the work that you do, it's a little bit harder, but remember that the foundations have boards that we have to answer to as well. And boards tend to really like data. And so when there is quantitative measures that you can include those. And if there's not, talk about the qualitative measures, because we will ultimately be coming back to you with those kind of questions, because we know what the board is going to ask, and it's going to be that. And so in order for us to make the best case for grants, we like to have as much of that information as possible. And kind of tied to that, I would build on what the others were saying in terms of talking to us. Obviously, everyone is busy and sometimes there isn't time for meetings. But ultimately, I think it will save time for everyone to actually try to have a meeting on the front end, because instead of a lot of back and forth, you can talk about your idea to us. We can talk about our priorities to you, and see where there is some overlap there and where we might be most likely to be able to fund. Because again, we know what might likely be most successful in going to our boards who are making the decisions. And so if we have the best idea possible at the front end, then you're not applying for something and then having to change and basically do a brand new application. We don't have to be reading multiple applications. And sometimes it won't be a fit at all. And that's good to know from the start, to try to not, waste anyone's time. But often through the conversations, even if we're not able to kind of find an adaptation that could work, it starts building a relationship. And I think that that's a key thing, building authentic relationships with the funders. I really appreciate actually getting to know the people I'm working with, because it's very easy to make it very transactional. And I understand that, but when you can actually get to know each other as people, and also understand like what other things are happening at both our organizations or both our projects that we're working on, then we're more likely to be able to link you to other opportunities that might be there, whether it's connecting you to another funder or, linking you to another partner that might be really beneficial for whatever project you're working on. And I think a lot of times people look at foundations and just think that, we hold the purse strings and where the money comes from. But I think one of the big things that foundations actually do is serve as that connector. And I talked about partnerships earlier. That is so key to all of the work that we do in our own work, but also trying to link our grantees and even people who aren't our grantees, but come to us with those other opportunities. So I think try not to view the grant making as a cutthroat competition. We do have limited resources, but when groups work together, they're more likely to be successful. And then the last thing I will say is, when possible, when going to try to get funding, think about sustainability on the front end. Funders will be more likely to fund a project unless it's a short-term project that's time limited, and then that's fine. But if it's a longer project, how are you going to be able to fund it moving forward after our grant money runs out? Because we can't fund projects or organizations forever. And part of that is also just talking to multiple funders and not just counting on one foundation or funding source as where you get all of the money. And so it's just really beneficial to think about the end or long-term from the start.
Thanks, Katie. I'm going to, a little bit later in the conversation today, I'm going to just review some other opportunities of other places that you may want to go or think about in terms of funding. As Katie said, sometimes broadening your funding options, can help to create, more dollars coming in from different places and help with the sustainability if a program needs to be funded in a certain way down the road. I want to just quickly open it up to questions that anyone might have, and and then give a few minutes for that, and then after that, I will, the panel can go ahead and hop off the call, and I will just go ahead and wrap up with some additional information just on other fundraising options. Does anyone have any questions for our panel? You guys have, we're not seeing a lot of faces. I know it's hard when you're, especially coming from all different areas. So we've got your names up there, but feel free if you need to raise your hand or you have a question. Anyone? Okay, well, if that's the case, then I'd just like to thank Dan, Courtney, and Katie for being on the call and sharing this great information. The foundation work is really important to our communities, and access to our community foundations and private foundations are, as you heard today, one really great way to be able to fund some of those really important projects. So if that's all, I'll let the panel go off to lunch, and we'll just wrap up with a few other things before the end of the meeting. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Rachel, I'm going to just go ahead and I just want to wrap up with a couple things. I want to talk about a couple other options for us. And, again, please feel free to put a question in the chat or just raise your hand or, whatever, if you with the raise the hand button, if that makes sense for you guys. And I'm just going to share my screen.
Well, one thing I want to add as you're getting your screen share ready is that the Canton Symphony, we also do development work all the time. We are a nonprofit, so we're constantly going for grants and we are constantly looking for things to get money because that's how we function. So please feel free to use us as a resource. If you ever have questions about grants, we have a development manager who is very happy to help with things like that. I am happy to help with things like that if you need someone to read anything. So feel free to always reach out to the Symphony also if you need someone to assist with everything, especially if you're in the Canton area. We also are I love the idea of partnering with lots of you to get things done. So feel free to always reach out.
I'm going to share my screen, and I believe I'm going to put you all on the spot here for a minute. So I'm going to start with a check-in question. And the check-in question is, if you had all of the funding you needed, what music program would you bring to life? So if I'm just gonna, I guess I'm gonna start with Julie because she's been on camera the whole meeting. So Julie, can you lead us off? Is there a special project in your wildest dreams that you would wanna, if you had all the money you could possibly handle, what would you spend it on?
Instruments. Actually, I'm changing schools this year, so I don't exactly know what the next school is going to have, but my last school, I didn't have any elementary instruments at all, just what I had purchased and brought. So I didn't have any ORF instruments, and I really, really wanted ORF instruments, but they're like $3,000 for just a basic set. So that I imagine is probably the case for my next school as well. So yeah. That's why I'm here.
Julie, what school district are you from?
Right now, Brown Local. So that's Malvern, it's Carroll County.
Okay.
I'm moving to Northwest Primary. So K through 2, but I still would love to teach ORF. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's speaking of Malvern, I'm not sure which community foundations may be closest to you. But one thing I did want to mention, Philanthropy Ohio is a foundation member organization. It represents foundations across the state. So if you guys ever want to go to that website, again, it's Philanthropy Ohio, and I'll at philanthropyohio.org, and I'll drop that in the chat. That's a great resource for looking at different foundations in your area, and you may be able to then connect, through the website to see what they're funding. Anyone else? Let's see. I guess I feel like a teacher. Julie, do you have any special project you'd love to fund? I guess it might be, it's kind of hard to see. Let's see.
Julie?
Anyone? Julie? Oh, sorry, Julie, go ahead.
This is Julie Kruger.
Yes.
I'm an art teacher, so I don't have a music program that I would like to fund. Although this year I am teaching a video production class. And so I'm interested in acquiring equipment and perhaps a program or whatever for that. We do a news program. I teach at a high school. We do a news program, and it's, pretty low budget. So I'd like to see it get a little bit higher budget.
Yeah. Julie, what district are you in?
I'm in the Cloverleaf Local Schools District in Medina County.
Well, and Dan gave the example of those iPad touches that people were asking for. So it sounds like equipment is an option with Martha Holden Jennings Foundation. But just like he said, make sure we're talking about the educational experience as opposed to just wanting the equipment, right? So let us know if you end up finding that equipment somewhere. Laura, you just put your camera on. So if you've got a project you'd like to share.
I'm in the same boat as Julie Fairless. I'm with CMSD, and I've been here 15 years. It looks like we're going to be getting ORF and band instruments, but haven't had them at all in the 15 years I've been here. So really would like the investment in the ORF, and our class sizes are larger. So what's being considered a class size and what we're getting isn't necessarily going to be enough to stretch across a class of 30 plus students.
Right. Wow. Thank you, Laura.
Mm-hmm.
Erin, you put your camera on. If you have a great project you'd like to share, that you would, the ultimate project.
Well, I'm actually an art teacher as well. And I did apply for a grant and I did not receive the grant. So that's kind of why I'm watching all of this. But I wanted to do like this community project where I'm just starting to dabble in some glass with my classes. And they loved the glass. It was a great experience, but I've done it before at another school where the community kind of comes in and we build a mosaic together. So just trying to find those connecting points to make it both educational and community based, I think was a good idea, but I don't think I maybe answered all the questions succinctly if they wanted.
Well, you may be able to go back and apply again with different answers. Yeah. Great. Thanks, Erin. Holly?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, gotcha.
Okay. I'm very slow with tech. I'm in the Canton City School District, and one of the things I've always wanted to do is be able to have music teachers helping with the band and the orchestra kids. And in my schools, I would say 1% are able to get their own private lessons and things like that. And it's kind of tricky because even sometimes having the kids stay after school, they won't have a ride home, things like that. So I would like to work on something where I can bring in like a percussionist, like I can teach a percussionist, but I'm a woodwind person. So I would rather have somebody with this in that. And in my building, it's just going to be 5th and 6th graders, but you can do a lot with a lot of 5th and 6th graders if you have the right things for them.
Great, thanks. Danielle, you want to share what you do with $1 million?
Yeah, I just agree with everyone else with the instruments enough for a general music setting. I think that's the biggest issue with being able to plan and have enough class time with instrumentation and orf and any other type of instruments. Instruments always seem to be what we use our most money on.
Uh-huh. John, anything from you? What kind of project would you want? And he's still thinking about it. Kathy, anything you can add? Something you'd like you see visionary?
Kathy doesn't have sound right now, so I'm
okay.
gonna put what she said in the chat. So Kathy's Central Ohio and the Pickaway County looking to do an artist in residence program. She's an art teacher, so bringing someone in to work with young people who is themselves a professional artist, which sounds very, very cool.
That is cool. You know, one of the things, I'm on the board at 91.3 The Summit. It's a radio station in Akron, but I think it has reach in Canton, Akron, and Youngstown. And I shouldn't say I know it has that reach. They have the Maryland Stroud instrument program where they collect instruments, they refurbish them, and then they give them out to schools. So it might be something to check into. It's not something where you get new instruments for everyone, but you might be able to pick up some things as you know, in terms of providing some things to your classes and your organizations. I'm going to go on to the next slide here real quick. I just want to talk, and again, I'm looking now to the side and seeing your faces, and then looking at my screen and seeing what you're seeing. So please forgive me for looking back and forth. But one of the things that I think many of your school districts may have is school foundations, and you are all, for the most part, you are not an individual nonprofit. So a lot of times you come up against issues with trying to raise dollars from corporations or from individuals because you can't provide that tax benefit that maybe a lot of donors are looking for. But a lot of schools will have a school foundation. And if you haven't gotten to know your school foundation and its board members, I think it's really important for you guys to, either check out to see if you've got a foundation. They're usually set up as a 501c3 supporting organization for your school district. So they are able to actually do fundraising for you. So they often are known as the people that provide the scholarships to graduating seniors. They can solicit dollars from individuals, corporations, and foundations. They can write a grant and get it funded without you having to go through the steps of working with the school district and all of that. They can provide that tax benefit acknowledgement letter for donations. And what's interesting about school foundations is often they're the ones that can build that extra thing that the school needs that the school budget doesn't have. A lot of times they may be the ones that'll build the field house for the sports, complex. Maybe they or maybe even raise money for a stadium. A lot of times, the arts departments will want a new auditorium or a performance space. A lot of times a school foundation will be able to go out and do the work of soliciting individual donors, writing grants to corporations, and be able to fund some of these art and special projects. So I just want you to be aware of that as an opportunity for you guys to think about another option of, getting to know those school foundations. Okay, hang on, my cursor's a little touchy. I think that Rachel sent out to you guys a link. Rachel, did you get a chance to send that link to them about additional funding, this funding opportunity?
I'm going to send it in a follow-up email with everything.
Okay.
So that way we'll all have this all in one handy, easy to find place.
Okay, super. And I'll send this PowerPoint to you as well, Rachel.
Perfect.
Rachel's going to send you, they're calling it the opportunity of a lifetime. The National Association of Music Education, they have some grant dollars that they're giving out. And I have not done a lot of research into this, but Rachel's going to send you the link. It looks like there's some opportunities for some funding that may come out of this particular group. And when I say finding opportunities, sometimes things like this pop up. Another one that just came up recently is the 2021 Night Arts Challenge. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Knight Foundation. It was started by James and John Knight. They were actually journalists, but they had a real love of arts, and they They used to own the Akron Beacon Journal. They've owned newspapers across the country, but because they started with the Akron Beacon Journal, Akron is a Knights city, and so the Knight Foundation has the Knights Arts Challenge, and applications are open from July 1st to July 31st, so we still have plenty of time. But you can go to knightfoundation.org and look up this challenge. Basically, what individuals can apply, individual teachers, individuals, and you submit 150-word sentence, or a couple of sentences about what you'd like to do, and if they like the idea of your project, then they invite you to apply for different things. So Erin, when you were talking about maybe working with glass, and were you saying you might want to do some type of public art installation? That kind of thing falls right into the Night Arts Challenge. So take a look at this. This might be a great opportunity. They've funded murals, they've funded plays, they've funded I don't know if they funded instruments in the past, but they have done a lot of work with teachers and getting students involved. So I think it might be a great opportunity for you guys to think about. Let's see. So again, just kind of keeping your eyes open to what might possibly be out there. And then again, because you guys are individual teachers, you are working, really for a school district, but often have additional projects that you want to do. Sometimes you can apply for a grant and use what we refer to as a fiscal agent to help you receive the money. So for example, as an individual, we cannot, the community foundation cannot fund you, but if you are working with a fiscal agent, we could send the funds to the fiscal agent, and the fiscal agent could then disperse the funds to you. So a fiscal agent allows an organization without internal revenue 501c3 status to receive funds. Individuals can use a fiscal agent, or for-profit businesses can do it as well. And a fiscal agent can offer numerous services. It retains the supervision and the control over the funds, making sure they're used the way that you've applied for them to be used, but it allows grantors to know that the funds are going to the right programs. And then they keep a record providing the funds are used for tax exempt purposes, and then they ensure that the funds are used in a manner that furthers both the fiscal agent's own charitable work. So think about arts and culture organizations that you might be aware of that you could use as a fiscal agent if you ever want to, reach out, create a collaboration with a nonprofit, and then be able to utilize that nonprofit. So again, you want to look for a nonprofit with a similar mission, some type of musical nonprofit. Tuesday Musical comes to mind as a possible, maybe there's something or an orchestra or a symphony might be able to be a fiscal agent for a program, especially if you're talking about orchestra instruments or something like that. And there is a fiscal sponsor directory, and it provides free searches and lists eligibility requirements. So another option for you to sort of research. Fractured Atlas is also a fiscal agent. It's the country's largest fiscal arts agent, and it helps raise dollars for artistic work. So again, some opportunities for you guys to think about. And then just going on to the next thing. Also, intermediaries are also a great way to think about partnering. Perhaps those in the Akron-Canton area have heard of Arts Now or Arts in Stark. IOBE is a national organization. IOBE stands for In Our Backyard. So I know we've all heard that phrase, not in my backyard, right? But In Our Backyard was created to help support projects that individuals come up with. And they use some crowdsourcing for that, crowdfunding, but they also do fund individuals. So a great place to look for opportunities for funding. Cuyahoga Arts and Culture, that's an organization that was established with the the cigarette tax in Cuyahoga County. There may be other opportunities in other counties in your area that you could look at that would fund individual arts projects. And then as Courtenay mentioned, donorschoose.org, again, a crowdfunding source of income. Again, like I said, that you list your individual projects and then donors go out and read about them and say, wow, that sounds cool. I'm going to send some dollars. But, we all have our own crowdsourcing, measures on our social media platforms as well. And, lots of opportunities to just get your message, your succinct, important project out there in front of people and have that opportunity to raise some dollars. So the last slide is questions, and I'm going to stop sharing and happy to take any questions. I'm just looking at the chat. Okay, no questions have popped up there, but feel free to, we've got 3 whole minutes or longer. I have a little bit of time afterwards if it goes over, but any questions anybody has? And if you did, Holly, you got one?
Is there like a calendar that says like deadlines for some of these various things? Because I know that deadlines are a big deal.
Right. That is a great question. And the answer is no. Each individual grantor can will and does set grant guidelines and dates individually. I don't think the Foundation Center has a master calendar because I think it's so random. The Cleveland Foundation accepts grants at any time. So we have a rolling grant application. You can apply at any time. We review grants on a monthly basis. So whenever they come in that month, it's reviewed. Akron Community Foundation has they have quarterly grant deadlines, and each grant deadline is applied to a particular field of interest. So once a year they do art grants. At a different time of year they do education, social services, and I can't remember what their 4th grant deadline is. So it is really about researching and taking a look at websites and writing them down. But Holly, good question, because one of the things we always recommend, I work with a lot of nonprofits who do grant writing, is to create that master grant writing calendar for yourself. And as you start to get to know that, hey, the Cleveland Foundation takes grants at any time, put that on a spreadsheet. And Akron Community Foundation, their arts grant is in October. Start to build that your own calendar so that you can think about, when the work is going to be important for you to get it done. So, I wish we had that master calendar. I wish we had a master calendar of events as well. So we'd know when people are doing fundraisers, right? Instead of all of them landing in September and October this year. So anyway.
And I'll add to that, like she said, most arts organizations have a calendar. So nonprofits like the Canton Symphony, we have a calendar for at least the grants that we apply for. So if you're ever any arts organization, if you reach out to their development department, you probably could get a head start on your research and your list. I don't think people mind sharing when deadlines are. I think that's a really easy way for you to start building up your network. Of course, it depends on where you're at. So if you're in the Canton area, you can always reach out to us. If you're in Columbus, you can reach out to the Columbus Symphony or some Columbus arts organizations to see if they'd be willing to share that. But that is an easy way to start your research process, I think.
Yeah, and I love that Kathy just added Ohio Arts Council has available grants listed. So again, it looks like most of those the deadline is the end of January. So for the following school year. So again, utilize the Ohio Arts Council, the National Endowment for the Arts. Some of those national organizations might have some opportunities, because sometimes you want to look nationally or statewide instead of locally. There are some, membership organizations and other places that, have some opportunities. So, we didn't really get into the technicalities of grant writing, but I think what you heard from all three, both our Dan, Courtenay, and Katie, is that There is a person behind every grant application that is reviewing that grant, and they are more than happy to answer questions. And, you know, a grant is really about reading the application and, you know, reading it from start to finish before you start filling it out. So you can start to think about the who, what, and where they want that information in that grant application. No sense in answering all the questions in the first section and then realizing, oh, they actually need that information somewhere else. So, you know, but it is telling your story. That's what you know, just finding your narrative, sharing it. And as people who love the arts, you will be your best storyteller. So, you know, that is, I think that's the best part about our arts and culture field, is we know how to tell the story. So any other questions that anyone has?
I just have a quick one. I'm in Canton City. Can I reach out to the Cuyahoga activities there?
You know, it all depends on each individual group. As Katie mentioned, we are Cuyahoga, Lake, and Geauga County specific. So Holly, you probably wouldn't qualify for a grant from the Cleveland Foundation. The Cuyahoga Arts and Culture program that does the cigarette tax, I think they only do Cuyahoga, but reach out to Arts in Stark, because, you know, that's sort of an umbrella organization, an advocacy organization, and they may have some good ideas and tips. And of course, you know, Stark County has a community foundation. So again, reach out directly to them. And Akron Community Foundation I think they may support some Medina and Canton grants as well. Rachel, you're shaking your head. You may know that too. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I will say Arts in Stark does a limited amount directly with teachers on individual projects. They do have a lot of information about where to go for things though, so they're a good resource in that way. But yeah, Stark Community Foundation would be really good. I'd also recommend the Ohio Alliance for Arts Education as a really good resource to go to. Jared Hartzler, the CEO, is really, Brenda.
I'm smiling because I love Jared.
Yes, Jared is great and has done a lot to bump those budgets that we've been seeing from the state budget. So they're a really great resource as well as I will also say OMEA, the Ohio Music Educators Association. They have a lot of good resources of where to point people, especially with they're more, I think, for money to get professional development opportunities, but I don't know exactly how much resources they have as opposed to getting funding opportunities, but I know there is some through them, so we can always go to them.
Terrific. Well, if there are no other questions, it was so nice to be with all of you. I always learn more myself when I'm, help facilitate some of these meetings. It was great to know more about Donors Choose. It was great to hear, Dan Keenan and the work at Martha Holden Jennings. I mean, for heaven's sakes, how great that they are very specifically focused on individual teachers as well as, school district projects. So it's a great opportunity for you guys to check more out. And whatever you do, I wish you the best of luck in getting the dollars to do it. And if not, I know you'll figure out a way to do it anyway, right? Because that's what teachers do. So with that, Rachel, and any other questions?
If there's nothing else, I want to thank you all so much for being here today. I know some people had to dash out at noon. This video was recorded, so this will be available to watch after the fact. And of course, I will be sending out all of these resources. So thank you, Brenda. Thank you for everyone who was here earlier. And thank you for all of you who are with us here today.
Yeah, great to see you all.